Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. And if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure that you give this video a thumbs up. And regardless of where you listen or watch, make sure you are also enrolled in notifications so that you get the notification when a new episode drops, which of course is every Tuesday, with the exception of the holiday season at the end of the year, but you catch my drift. This week, I have a bit of a shorter episode as I'm anticipating a shorter episode. And I've been very inspired by the Olympics, of course. The Olympics are, underway, almost over actually, which is sad. And naturally watching Simone Biles, who is the most decorated American gymnast in history, watching her compete after having to drop out during the Tokyo Olympics has been really inspiring. And so it made me think of basically this theory or understanding of burnout. Naturally, we understand that burnout happens. But specifically, I thought it would be interesting to talk about when you step away or when you should step away from something. And obviously, Simone Biles knows when to step away. So for those who don't know, Simone Biles has just recently this week become the most decorated American gymnast in Olympics history. And in 2020 at the Tokyo Olympics, she dropped out of most of the gymnastics events because of her mental health and because of a condition called the Twisties, which to my knowledge is basically a condition that happens when gymnasts basically lose sight of where they are in midair. When I look at the actual definition, I think it's pretty on par with what it is. Yeah, it says here, the Twisties, which is basically the inability to twist and flip safely, a mental block that causes gymnasts to lose track of their position while midair, which is obviously very dangerous considering the amount of power and height and speed that these gymnasts have. And especially Simone Biles, I think she reaches like 12 feet when she's doing her floor routine. So anyway, I'm not a gymnast. I was never really a gymnast, but this is what I know. And so for those of you who maybe don't keep up with the Olympics or don't know Simone Biles, which I feel like it would be hard not to know who she is, that's her that's the background here. So she's really now, for the first time since the Tokyo Olympics, competing on this international stage at the Olympics in Paris. And everyone was obviously very thrilled to see her come back. What was interesting is I very distinctly remember in 2020 when people gave her a lot of crap for dropping out of the Olympics in Tokyo, which is quite frankly a sign, I would say, of the lack of compassion, lack of patience, lack of understanding, and just general lack of empathy that people have for athletes, celebrities, notable people. And I don't know if this is like from the rise of social media or what, but I just find that there is, generally speaking, less compassion for people who are quote unquote famous or well known. And we see this all the time. People say that they, are attacked on this like international stage, obviously, in social media and all of these things. And I remember in 2020, people again gave her a lot of crap for dropping out, even though it was physically unsafe for her to continue to compete. And she was prioritizing her mental health. So I just thought that this was a really not interesting thing to talk about, because I would never say it's interesting to talk about someone else's challenges or mental health struggles. But I do think it is, I guess, well positioned because it does give a bit of a what am I trying to say? Like a bit of a window into how to know when to walk away and how difficult it must be to walk away from something like that. Obviously, it's very relative. Like, I'm not an Olympian, but if I try to relate to this, then maybe it's like walking away from my career or walking away temporarily for something, taking a step back, taking a leave, right? Like, we can relate on different levels. I don't think that any Olympians listen to my podcast, but if you do, let me know. That would be kind of cool. But you don't, probably not. And so this is where it's like, okay, someone who is arguably one of the best athletes of all time recognized that they needed to step away. I just couldn't imagine how difficult that must have been. And then to really have to do it like in the spotlight where everyone has the opportunity to judge you or share their opinion, which I think is really where we tend to lack empathy, or people generally tend to lack empathy because they just feel as though they have the right to share their opinions or weigh in just because someone lives a public life. I do not have the expertise to weigh in on the issues with social media and like all of this stuff, but this is just like outside looking in, and someone with like a teeny tiny following on Instagram and social media, I guess it like is a little scary. I think it's definitely something that holds me back personally from being more open on social media. But I really want to reflect on that Simone Biles is really a perfect example of how you have to walk away sometimes for your own sake. And that walking away from something that you love, that you're passionate about, that you've dedicated years and hours and endless, countless moments of your life to, a specific trade or passion, does not mean that when you step back in, you're going to lose all of that hard work. This is a perfect example of that she walked away 4 years ago. She's now 4 years older, 4 years of training have gone into where she is today. And she's earned this title of being the most decorated American gymnast of all time. And it's very poetic to me that she walked away from the largest, greatest athletic competition in the world and was able to come back, not only emotionally, but physically return to really an elite status. And it would be really interesting if she, after the Olympics, shared more insight, because I know she has a documentary and she's certainly open on social media and things like that. But it would just be really interesting if she weighed in on how it feels to have walked away 4 years ago, to have come back 4 years older, which, by the way, from what I was hearing during the all around finals the other day, is that the average age of gymnasts that compete at the Olympic level, I believe, was 22. So she's 5 years older than the average age of a gymnast, and considered one of the older gymnasts at the Olympics, maybe if not the oldest. And so she was able to come back 4 years after stepping away for her own mental and physical health and to continue to be on top. Like, that's amazing. And I really think that if she were to kind of hindsight this and think about what she thought was going to happen when she walked away, like, did she think that she would continue to have a career in gymnastics? Did she think that she would be able to return as a decorated Olympian, like someone who wins gold medals, basically, because she just collects them all and she's created skills, from what I understand, too? I mean, like, I just wonder, I guess, if she thought that would happen, if she had such belief in herself that she knew she'd be able to remain on top in this Olympics, or if she had maybe self-doubt like any normal human would, that taking a step back and then having to kind of jump back in and then, train for this next Olympics, the one that we're currently in, if this is surprising or totally on par with what she expected. I do think that, especially as a former athlete, I do tend to look up to athletes. Like when I watch the rugby team, when I watch like all of these Olympians, triathletes, like all of these people, swimmers, I feel like if I don't mention it, it doesn't count. But all of the Olympic athletes, I watch them and I'm like, how do they physically do this? And it reminds me that there are also people who look at like what others do, whether it's someone who's a doctor, someone who is a CEO, or someone who's in HR, and they think, oh, I could never do that. I've been told many times that someone could never be in HR. And while being in HR is certainly not being an Olympian because you can't compare the two, I just think it's interesting when we see someone else kind of achieving like the most out of their craft. Like getting a gold, silver, or bronze medal is arguably the highest achievement that you can have as an athlete. Obviously, gold is the tippy top. But when you see, like when you reflect on that, it's like, well, okay, if my craft is HR, or if my craft is being working in finance, what is my greatest achievement? Like, is my greatest achievement being a CHRO? Is my greatest achievement being a CFO, right? Like, depending on the vertical someone's in. It's just interesting, I think, to see and gain inspiration from these athletes who have reached the highest level of their athletic careers, because obviously these are career athletes. So I don't know. I could be like very cringy about this and very corny, that I find so much inspiration coming out of the Olympics. But I do think that's part of the intention, is that we watch these incredible, incredible athletes compete on an international stage at a competition that has the world's best athletes, again, all around the world, coming together to compete against one another. Like I can't even compare what like is similar in business, but it's just so fascinating to me. And I'm sure that there are other people who walk away feeling really inspired. And again, I mean, the point of this episode is for me to really reflect on how Simone Biles is a great example of how it's okay to walk away if you're feeling burnt out, how it's okay to walk away if you physically, mentally, or emotionally need something else. And, if people judge you just like they judged her, oh well, they're not the ones that have to, live with and deal with the internal struggles that someone might be dealing with. So I just give her a lot of kudos. I think it's much harder to walk away from something that you love than it is to stay in it at your detriment. Like, it's just, there's no comparison to say, I love this sport, I love gymnastics, I love this thing that I do that I'm so passionate about, but I don't have the physical or emotional capability to continue to do this now. I'm walking away. That is like, that takes such strength in so many ways, I think. And I'm sure that I hope, maybe I'm not sure, but I hope that there are people maybe who originally criticized her who reflect on this Olympics and say to themselves, I was wrong, and or that's really impressive. Because also, like, I don't know about you, but when I read comments where people are like, they only got bronze, or they only got this many points, it's like, when was the last time you were in the Olympics? Susie Q or whomever we want to, reference here. Like, who allowed you to be so judgmental and to be the person that had the right to pass judgment on this individual who has achieved such greatness in their craft? Like, it's just kind of mind-boggling to me. And I was recently talking to someone about like something which is totally different. And again, very hard to relate here, but I was talking about how bizarre it is to me and to both of us that leaders still don't understand some leaders, obviously not all, how some leaders still don't understand how people, human beings, drive their business forward. If your customers are unhappy, you have to look at your internal employees. If your internal employees are not happy, your customers are not going to be happy. So it's like sometimes we have this person and I, we were talking that, or speaking with one another about how we clearly see this connection and yet others don't. And so it just like, it does feel a little reminiscent when I see comments online where people are like, they only got bronze, they only got silver. That's not a reason to celebrate. And it's like, what don't you get? How do you not see the connection here that this person is competing against the world's best athletes in their vertical and they've won a medal for it? And you have probably never been to the Olympics. You actually have probably never even made it to a state or national competition. It's just so funny to me how these connections are not intrinsic for so many people. And maybe it's like this blindness that people get when they're like consuming content constantly on social media. But I do think, like, again, relating back to what we all do, or what some of you may want to do, which is like HR, supporting people, all this stuff, we have to help people to make these connections. We can't just say they haven't made the connection, I'm going to just do it for them, or I'm giving up, they're never going to make this connection. We have to help people to be better. And it's just, I mean, if you are someone that criticized Simone Biles, you have to think introspectively about why you criticized her and why you may criticize others. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I definitely plan to continue to watch the Olympics. Who knows if I will, find even more inspiration than I already have. But it's, you could even look at like Celine Dion. She was singing at the top of the Eiffel Tower, and she was just diagnosed recently with an autoimmune disorder that is neurological I think it's called stiff person syndrome. And yet she still found a way to get the opportunity and actually achieve being able to sing in front of, obviously everyone there and everyone watching. It's just, I think it's really incredible to see the efforts that people make to not only harness their strength, but also really stay committed to the things that they're passionate about. And even when they're super passionate about it, they have to know when to walk away and when to take a step back, or, as sometimes we say on this podcast, move slow in order to move fast. Like sometimes taking a step back, either moving more slowly or stepping away from something, can actually enable you to move much further in the long run. And so that's my takeaway from Simone Biles and her incredible performance at this Olympics, and her incredible achievement of becoming the most decorated American gymnast in history. So kudos to her. And honestly, kudos to all of these other athletes too. So, and there are amazing athletes, obviously, worldwide, but I realize this is an HR podcast. You might be thinking, what does this really have to do with what we do? And I just think it's important sometimes to take these opportunities where I have the moment to speak to all of you through my episodes and allow us to think about other things that are going on in the world and with people, that allow us to think more broadly, to be less critical, more compassionate, and maybe even have a little bit more compassion for ourselves. Someone who's listening to this might really be struggling with whether or not to return to work after maternity leave, or really struggling with the environment that they work in and trying to figure out, do they go somewhere else? Take this as a message to really not be afraid of stepping away or walking away or prioritizing yourself if you're capable of doing that, meaning like if you're really able to. Obviously, there are some financial implications sometimes with these decisions, but if you really can prioritize yourself, it's an investment. It is not a loss. And I think sometimes where we have these misses, where we struggle to walk away, it's because we see it as a loss rather than an investment in something. or a gain. And Simone Biles, again, is a great example of how she saw this as an investment rather than a loss. She walked away from the Olympics, and instead of seeing it as a loss or something that was going to negatively impact her in the long run, she saw this hopefully at some level as an investment in her future and in her health and in her well-being. And like I said, that's really hard to do. So if you are struggling with that, it makes sense because it's not something that people probably decide easily or come to the decision on easily. So if you are someone who has had to make a really difficult decision to prioritize yourself or step back, or, maybe you've had to work through burnout in some way and you've, made changes that were really difficult to make, let me know, because I would love to hear your stories and your anecdotes. And hopefully we all have a little bit more compassion and empathy and understanding for the people around us, whether we know them or not. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much for listening again to this episode, which is obviously a little bit unique and maybe a little bit of a stretch from what we typically talk about, but hopefully you enjoyed. And please, again, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode, and head to my website so you are also subscribed to my newsletter, where we talk a little bit more in depth about all of the things that come up related to HR and all of these episodes. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.